Hello, everybody, and welcome to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, Igniting Leadership Excellence. This is episode number 13.
Woohoo.
Yeah, that's great. 13 episodes. I'm Rick, and this is my able co-host, Emily.
Hello.
This is where we talk about all things involving leadership. So you're going to listen to a lot of different topics as we go through each one of these episodes. So, Emily, what are we talking about today?
We're going to be talking about the three myths about leadership.
Three myths about leadership. But before we begin, Emily and I want to thank those who are providing feedback to us and for
Yeah.
those who are listening and those who are watching on YouTube, because you can watch us on YouTube. And so we appreciate the positive feedback that we have been getting. I did have a question posed to me by one of my friends, and he asked, "Hey, Rick," he said, "are you and Emily using a script?" And I said, "No." I said, "We have an outline." And folks, we have an outline so it can keep us on track. So we know not to go too long. We don't want to be rambling on, and then all of a sudden 2 hours have passed, and we've realized that. So no, this is not scripted,
Mhm.
but we do have an outline. So Emily, reiterate again. What are we talking about?
So we're going to turn back to the topic of three myths about leadership. So let's dive right on in on myth number one. Your rank and or title makes you a leader.
Yes, that is a myth. There was that
Yeah.
television show called Mythbusters. So, we're not doing the same stuff that those guys did, which that was a cool show. But we are busting this myth is you rank a title, a position, that doesn't make you a leader at all. That simply means that you have authority. As a battalion chief, that didn't make me a leader. When I was a lieutenant, that didn't make me a leader. When I was a sergeant in the Marine Corps and a sergeant in the Air Force, that did not make me a leader. I had a position of authority. So
Mhm.
when I attended the Executive Fire Officer program at the National Fire Academy, it was a great 4-year program when I went. I loved it. I loved going back there to Emmitsburg, Maryland, which is pretty close to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, as you know.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
loved studying the campaign and going up there. But in that very first year, one of our required readings was a book called Leadership on the Line
Mm.
by Heifetz and Linsky. It's a great book. I still refer to it. I've gone through it with some of the captains on my shift when I was on the job, and some of the other officers as well. And I highly recommend the book. They described authority as what a person is allowed to do. And then also, Heifetz and Linsky said that leadership pushes the envelope, challenging expectations, and acts outside of the job description. Whoa, whoa, whoa there, Ricky. What do you mean pushes the envelope, challenges expectations, and acts outside of the job description? Not me. I'm not going to do that. Emily, one of the oft-used phrases that I hear people use, it's a cop-out,
Yeah.
is, "Well, that's above my pay grade. I don't know anything about that."
Or that wasn't in the job description
Yeah,
that I
that
signed
wasn't,
up for.
yeah, it is in the job description. It's that last sentence that says, other duties as assigned.
That's very true.
Yeah, that's
Uh-huh.
that's that catch-all, people. So hey, quit using these stupid excuses. That's not my pay grade. It's like, yeah, I'll tell you what. When I was in the Marine Corps, we were taught that if you did not know the answer to something, you told the other person, "Sir, I do not have that answer, but I will find one and I will get back to you." That is taking responsibility and accountability. That's leadership, folks, when
Yeah.
you do that. But when you come up with this numbskull stuff of, "Well, that's above my pay grade. I don't know about that," that's nothing but a cop out. That's a cop out, Emily. I want to also add about leadership. It's about integrity, ethical behavior, and taking care of the people who work for you,
Yeah.
which we're going to be talking more about that in another episode. But by the way, Heifetz and Linsky were not advocating insubordination. And I'm not advocating insubordination either. To the contrary, they were describing leaders who have the courage to act when others won't. Someone who will make the decision when other people are freezing or they're just absolutely too afraid to make a decision because it's like, well, we're not allowed we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Alan Brunacini, who had been the fire chief down in the city of Phoenix, Arizona, for years, he wrote a book on customer service, and really, it's a great book that he had. But there was a story in there talking about during one of the monsoonal rains, an elderly woman was at the bus stop with her groceries, and it was just pouring rain. And a Phoenix Engine Company was going down, and they saw her. Now they didn't just drive by; they stopped and they put her in their rig with her groceries and took her to her house.
Mhm.
That's leadership on the part of the captain of that rig saying, no, we've got a duty to act here. We're going to take care of this person because she's in need. That's what Heifetz and Linsky were talking about. They didn't get on the radio and call dispatch and saying, Mother, may I do this? They didn't call their battalion chief and say, Hey, chief, may I have permission to do this? No, they acted. That is leadership. And
Yeah.
that's completely different than the people who are out there, and maybe some of you that are listening or watching that got their lips attached to the boss's rear end. And we all know them. We've all seen them. Some people are so closely attached to the boss's rear end that if the boss makes a sharp right turn, it's going to break their neck.
Well, and I think too, when they talk about insubordination, it's because people have the courage to ask questions. And we know the saying, questions stir the conscience, but accusations harden the heart. But it does take courage to go and ask those questions. And I
Yes.
think that's part of being a leader as well.
Yes, absolutely. It does take courage to ask the questions and say, hey, listen, supervisors, bosses, when somebody's coming to ask you a question, listen to them. I heard a story relayed. I went to a fire department conference down in San Diego several years ago, and the gentleman that was speaking, his name was Dennis Compton, who he had also worked under Brunacini in Phoenix, but then Compton went on to be a fire chief in the Phoenix area. He was relaying a story that when he was a captain, he was in the same firehouse with a battalion chief, and another engine company pulled up out front. And the crew came inside, and the brand new firefighter on the rig had an idea, and he shared it with the battalion chief. And the battalion chief just shut him down,
Mm.
put him down, crushed him, and they left. The crew left. And Compton asked the chief, why did you do that? And the battalion chief turned around and said, because that's the way that I was treated when I was a rookie.
That's
No,
sad.
that's wrong. That is not leadership.
No.
That's dictatorship. Yeah, so that's a surefire way, folks, to destroy trust. Because I guarantee you, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the fire department, police department, military, EMS, or you're making widgets, that type of stuff gets around really quick. And then the boss, the so-called leaders who say, I have an open door policy, but nobody ever comes around. Jeez, I wonder why they don't come around.
Right. Yeah. That term can be thrown around, but what does it really mean?
Right. Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
So a lot of times people are often promoted due to their technical competence, but that does not automatically mean that they can lead people.
That's absolutely right. And I know that you saw this when you were working in human resources in,
Yeah.
one of the larger cities here in Colorado, because when somebody's promoted for technical competence, what type of problems did you see, Emily, from a personnel standpoint?
They're not people people.
They're not people. What are they?
Whatever the term is. They just they know how to do their job, but they don't know how to work with people.
Yes.
They don't know how to reach out to them. They don't know how to be relational or personable. They just know how to do their job.
So, in other words, yes, they know how to do their job from a technical competence standpoint, but they have no clue about how to lead people,
Yeah,
correct?
correct.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
So is it possible then to train the leaders?
yeah, It is possible. It is possible. The question remains is it being done?
Yeah.
Now, for the people who have listened to us now for the past 12 episodes, number 13 right now, you may recall that I've said that I'm a member of the Maxwell Certified Leadership Team, John Maxwell, the author. And we have access to mentors nearly on a daily basis. And we could spend all day long listening to the mentors, which I've got certain calls that I listen to. One of the mentors, his name is Ray Popham, and he was providing a teaching here a couple weeks back, and he was sharing some very interesting statistics that's related to leadership training and development in organizations. And the first statistic came from the Harvard Business Review. They reported that organizations are spending $60 million a year on leadership development, but
Wow.
they are not sure that they're getting a return on their investment. That's ludicrous. That's
Yeah.
ludicrous. All these organizations spending all this money on leadership development. What is it? Just so they can turn around and say, "Well, we provide leadership development to our people." Well, what are they doing? There. I seen a statistic the other day that after somebody sits through a training, 74% of those people forget what they learned.
Yeah.
So there's an absolute difference between training and development, which
Yeah.
we've talked about that in a previous episode. Here's another interesting statistic that came from Gallup. They report that 83% of organizations believe it is important to develop leaders, but only 5% of those organizations actually have a development plan for their people.
Hmm.
Now, development is an ongoing thing versus training. You come in, bang, you're in there. Most people leave, and the bosses never say, "Hey, what did you learn?" or "Could you share what you learned with everybody else?" No, it's done. So, where's that stuff? Where's that stuff go? But I find it incomprehensible that 83% of organizations say there ought to be, an organizational development plan for leaders, but then only 5% of those are doing that.
Like they're talking out both sides of their mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like politicians.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. Forbes reported that 90% of the people surveyed said that they were not prepared for the role that they stepped into.
Yeah.
So that underscores, some of these different facts right here. As people become overwhelmed. You got Joe Schmuckatelli, who's very great at his job, is very technically competent. Somebody above him says, "Hey, we ought to promote Joe. We're going to make him the team lead," and voila, there's problems that start to happen because they haven't had any leadership development training. Fortunately, in the fire service, there are departments that provide that leadership training, and there's others that don't. It's just like somebody goes through the promotional process and they get promoted to a lieutenant or captain, and it's like, there you go, have at it. You are a great driver operator, you're a great firefighter, you know how to use all the equipment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to lead the crew, or if they become a battalion chief, how to lead a shift. So there's so many of these
Yeah.
myths. I mean, we're targeting just three myths. We could probably, cover the next 3 or 4 episodes with myths about leadership. I want to add, there are scientific elements, human factors that go into leadership, but in the end, leadership is more art than it is science. So,
Well, and with art, that's like up to interpretation.
mm,
So really, I feel like leadership is so like complex, and I don't want to say complex, like scare you complex, but it comes from the
mm,
heart. It comes from your character.
mm,
And it comes from like, well, I might lead differently than you would because I have a totally different personality,
right.
but that still doesn't negate that it's not leadership,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Many times you go to, beginning leadership classes, and, you hear about the three styles: authoritative, democratic, and laissez-faire. And when I was younger, in the military, and I got caught up into this thing of, well, I got to be in one of these boxes, and I sure enough don't want to be laissez-faire, hands off. So I was leaning more towards the autocratic position of leadership, but I've learned over the years that you've got to have a blend of all three of these different types of leadership. And you're absolutely correct, Emily. Our personalities, our backgrounds, our training, our education,
Yeah.
our experiences, they all come into play. But the main thing that you hit on that I want to emphasize is character, the
Yeah.
character of the individual.
Yeah.
So what's next?
Well, next will be myth number 2, which is leadership is easy and anyone can do it.
What do you think about that?
No. I think that's just another cop out, and that's just someone who doesn't realize the effort that they have to put in with leadership. Just like the effort you
Mhm.
have to put in with relationships. You just can't you show up, but you have to it takes two. Like you
Right.
have to put effort into it and you have to show up.
Yes, absolutely. But there's always some loudmouth bragger out
Yep.
there. I know that I can do this. I could do this better. That's easy. That's really easy. You're not doing anything there. I remember when I was a lieutenant, I had a guy that was going to be acting for 3 out of the 6 shifts that I was going. And his approach was, "Oh, this is really easy there, Rick. I'm not going to have any problem with this. You're just riding over there in the right seat, that type of a thing." And so I was like, "Okay, well, we'll see about that." And came back from vacation, and I said, "So, how'd it go?" "Oh, easy, nothing to it. I knew it would be easy." I said, "Oh, okay. So tell me, what happened while I was gone? Did you respond to any emergencies?" "Oh, yeah. We responded to several single patient medical calls." And I said, "Anything else?" I said, "Did you pick up any fires or any technical rescues during that time?" So, well, no. So, "Oh, yeah, we did have one dumpster fire. We pulled the bumper line and, put the thing out." I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "So, when somebody was filling in for you," I said, "were there any personnel issues that came up? Was there any decisions that you had to make? Any problems come up with the public that you had to deal with?" And he said, "Oh, well, no." I said, "You got any wildland fires? Any hazmat calls?" "Well, no." I said, "Well, just single patient EMS, except for that one dumpster fire." Yeah, it looked easy to him because his 3 shifts that he acted, he was not challenged with any significant type of emergencies that where he had to make decisions, that
Mm,
where he had to lead the crew, that where he didn't deal with any kind of issues that popped up in the firehouse with personnel. He didn't deal with any disgruntled citizens. There's millions of fire chiefs out there who think they know what firefighters ought to be. He didn't deal with any of that stuff. So, yeah, it appeared easy to him. But he, other than knowing me and knowing a little bit about me, he did not know about my background. He did not know what experiences I had gained. He did not know what type of training that I had put myself through, what type of training I had been to but in the military prior to even coming to Loveland Fire Rescue. I'm reminded of a story that John Maxwell shares often. And after a speech that he had given, a young man approached him and said, "I want to do what you do." And Maxwell asked him, "Are you willing to do what I did to get where
mhm.
I'm at now?"
Yeah.
And when this man said, "What do you mean?" And when Maxwell explained his career path to where he was at right now, he said the guy just shrugged and walked away. So that's
Yeah.
typically what happens with these braggarts who think that, leadership is easy.
Well, it's like those entrepreneurs that we see in Shark Tank
Mm,
that it looks like they're so successful, they're making millions of dollars, but then when you get down to like the nitty-gritty and you see where they've had like what they've had to sacrifice and where they've had to come to get
mm.
to where they're at, like you don't see any of that. It's just like with the leadership, you don't see that. And sometimes it comes naturally to people to lead, and others it takes a lot of work.
Right, you're right. And that behind the scenes thing, I'm reminded of an individual, Jamie Kern Lima, who did the cosmetics. And I think she had been on Shark Tank. And John Maxwell has interviewed her. And he's recently written a book called a high road leadership, and he refers to her in this book. And yes, people could look at Jamie Kern Lima and say, oh, she was an overnight success. This must have been so easy for her. But you got to go back and you got to look at that story.
Yeah.
You know, what happened? Michael Jordan. Hey, people, I didn't know this until a few years ago, because I'm not really a big basketball fan, but most people know who Michael Jordan was. He played in the NBA, a star player. Did you know he never made his high school basketball team?
Oh, wow.
Right, right. So it's these behind the scene things that people don't see, but
Yeah.
then the braggarts say, that's easy. I can do that.
Well, that's because leadership is not easy because leaders are involved with people.
Absolutely. And you and I both know that when you're working with people,
It's real
difficult,
complicated.
yes, it gets complicated. We've got different personalities, we've got different aspirations, different problems, different challenges,
Yeah.
and related to that, when I was growing up, used to hear a lot of this stuff for leaders is like, hey, you leave your problems at the door or put your problems in the locker. That's another myth.
I
Right, right,
agree.
right there,
Yeah,
right there.
I do.
It's like when somebody is going through a tremendous issue off duty or, out of hours from your work, uh, they bring it to work. And by the way, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but yes, it's called Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, but you don't have to be a firefighter to listen to what Emily and I are talking about, because I know for a fact that we've got several people who are not firefighters that are listening to this. So yeah, Emily, people.
Yeah, so anytime we are working with people, it's not going to be easy. Even with the top performers, it's not going to be easy because they bring a different set of challenges to
Mhm.
the table compared to people who are on the end of a low performance scale.
Yeah, you're right. And what I have seen in my career and time in two branches of the military and in the fire service is the low performers so often are the ones that get the attention.
Mm,
This so-called squeaky wheel
yeah.
notion. And I got caught up in that when I was first promoted to a battalion chief. I had a real personnel issue that I was dealing with, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into it here. But I learned a lesson in this because I thought, hey, I'm inheriting this guy. I have superb leadership skills and ability, and certainly I'm the one who is going to turn this guy around. And everybody's going to say, look at Rick. Wow, nobody else could do it. Yeah, right, Davis. What I found out there is this guy was a lot of time. And
Mm,
there was one day, and I detail this, not the names, but I detail the situation in my book, The Furnace of Leadership Development. Actually, it's in chapter 3 called Inheriting an Organizational Monster. And what I found out is when you inherit an organizational monster, those people are vampires. They suck the blood and the life out of the leader.
yeah.
And in the case, it was the shift. And I had an individual say, why don't you spend the same amount of time with me as you do with my lieutenant?
Mm,
And it hit me all like I was gut punched. Literally felt like I was gut punched. All the blood shunting to my stomach and getting tight. And he
yeah.
was right. And a couple days later, one of the captains came to me and said, Rick, this guy's sucking the life out of you, and he's sucking the life out of the shift. And so I determined right then and there that I wasn't just going to shuck him away, but I wasn't going to spend as much time with him, because let's go back to the high performers. The
Yeah.
high performers need to be challenged. And when they see the leader, in my case, as the battalion chief, spending so much time with a poor performer, the troublemaker, it's like, well, what's going on here? And so I learned a very difficult lesson there, I should say a hard lesson. The situation was difficult, but it was a hard lesson there, is that there were other people on the shift who needed my attention. They needed me to challenge them in their leadership development. And what I also found out is those high performers, challenging them to higher levels actually is more difficult than dealing with the problem children on the shift,
Yeah.
because there you've got a formula and it's called progressive discipline, with that. And so you got guidance that comes along, departmental rules and regulations and human resources that can help out. And of course, the legal department and so forth like that. But getting the people who are the high performers, and finding out how can I challenge them, that becomes difficult. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I just want to say
yeah.
something with that example. Um, it's cool because we talked about that leadership takes courage, and that some leaders or managers think that when someone comes to them and questions their authority, for instance, that they're
Mhm.
being insubordinate. But this is a perfect example that people on your shift saw a need and saw that they were getting neglected. And so
Mhm.
they had the courage to come to you to address the problem, but you had the humbleness to take their um, criticism per se and to really assess the situation and be like, well, what am I doing?
Mhm.
So I think that's just a really cool example of tying everything together, what it looks like to be a leader, but also be a leader in a leadership position.
Well, thanks for that assessment,
Yeah.
Emily, and your kind words there.
Mm.
I appreciate it. So what do we got next on our list?
So myth number 3 is if you do not respect the person, then respect the rank and or title.
Yeah, and where I saw this one really pop up and get reinforced was in the HBO series The Band of Brothers.
Mm.
Dick Winters eventually became the commanding officer of Easy Company, but at the beginning of the series, is based on a true story, was Captain Sobel. He was the commanding officer of the company. He was the company officer. And essentially, when you read about him and you see what he did, he was very tyrannical and in his handling of that company. However, after the war, there were a lot of the survivors who said, yeah, he was definitely difficult, but we do believe he prepared us for combat. Well, there was a little bit of a mutiny that took place amongst the enlisted men, especially certainly the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers, who they did not want to be led into combat by Sobel because
Mm.
he was incompetent in his tactical skills, and they felt that he was just going to get them all killed. So essentially, they signed a statement saying that they could not follow this man. There was punishment that came down to several of them. However, the commanding officer, Sobel's commanding officer, relieved him and sent him off to another unit to train medics or not medics, excuse me, chaplains and support personnel to jump.
Mm.
At the end of the series, when the Germans are surrendering, Captain Winters was promoted to Major Winters, and he's sitting in a Jeep, and Captain Sobel comes by and just tries to ignore Winters. And Winters stopped him and said, if you don't respect the man, respect the rank, because Sobel was not going to salute Winters. So Sobel saluted Winters, and Winters returned the salute. Well, I've given this concept a lot of thought. If you don't respect the person, respect the rank. That person doesn't respect their rank.
Mm.
That person who is the tyrant, who is the idiot, who is the jerk, who's treating their people bad, you know, I and there was a guy in my last unit in the Marine Corps, and he was a major, and I won't use his last name. His first name was Mike. And the way that he treated the enlisted men and women and even the junior officers, and he did something one day. He came into our section. This was after the Marine Corps had taken me out of firefighting because there was too many of us, and I got retrained into aviation operations. This major, he came into our section one day with orders because he's going to do a cross country flight. And he went up to our gunnery sergeant, the gunny, and put the paperwork in front of him. And I had one of those little stickies that says sign here. And he was saying, sign there, gunny, right there on that line. You see that right there, pounding his finger on the desk. Yeah, and the gunny had been in the Marine Corps at that point, about 12 years. Uh, he had gotten two meritorious promotions, and he was just humiliating the gunny and in front of the rest of us. And then he walked out. Well, Major Mike became Jackass Mike. And you know what? We didn't respect him. We complied. We complied. That because we had to under Uniform Code of Military Justice. So it was, yes, sir, Major such and such. No, sir, Major such and such. And when we were outside of the building and we saw him, we'd salute. That was compliance. It wasn't respecting the rank.
Mm.
Because he didn't respect his rank. He didn't respect the ranks of the people who were under him and above him. Well, certainly he was kissing their rear ends. Is what he was doing. So this notion of, well, if you don't respect the man, respect the rank. No, there's a difference between respect and compliance because there were officers in both the Air Force and the Marine Corps that it's like I had no problem saluting them because they had earned it. And there were others I only saluted them or I only said yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am because I had to.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what that one is there, Emily.
So, in closing, let's recap the three myths that we talked about today.
Okay.
So, myth number one was your rank and or title makes you a leader.
Right. Myth number two is leadership is easy and anyone can do it.
And lastly, myth number three, if you do not respect the person, then respect the rank and or title.
That's right. And as we've said throughout this podcast here, these are just three myths that we have covered today. And there are others, and maybe possibly in the future, as we proceed with our podcast, we'll talk about some of the other myths that are out there. So, folks, that's the end of episode number 13 today. Thank you for tuning in. Or if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. Hey, if you find our podcast to be useful, please like and share. Spread the word. Let other people know about it. Let them know, hey, listen, you don't have to be a firefighter. Emily's not a firefighter.
Not even close.
You don't have to be a firefighter to listen to this. Also, links to my website are in the show notes, and it's at www.fireofficerleadershipacademy.com. You can learn more about the services I provide to people, courses that I offer, and what I do as far as individual or small group coaching is concerned. You can also find my weekly blog that's posted up on my website and then also on LinkedIn. You will find me on LinkedIn, and I post that blog up on Wednesdays. For the firefighters who are listening, now this is an only firefighter thing that I'm about to share with you. If you're on Facebook, I have the Firefighters Leadership Network, and that's only open to current and retired firefighters. It doesn't matter whether you are a volunteer firefighter, a career firefighter, a wildland firefighter, our firefighter, all firefighters. It's open to you. And I also share my blog on there. So thank you for tuning in and listening. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.